Welcome everyone. It is April the 8th, 2020. I am here with the usual suspects, but we're very honored to have Rob Stewart back with us, giving some update on the innovative work that the Scottish Social Services Council has been doing over the years. And Rob's going to talk to us today about how he's basically taking authentic assessment for continuing professional development for an entire sector and just sort of taking it up a notch with peer assessment. Just to, as an aside, Rob was honored recently as being, what is it, Learning Developer of the Year from Training Journal, is that it? Or
it was their Learning and Development Professional of the Year for 2019.
Oh, 2019, okay, right. Okay, because they don't know really what you're going to do in 2020, but maybe you can tell us.
I don't think even I know what I'm going to do in 2020. I still have no idea what I was doing last year.
Okay, great. So, well, they can tell you, and you can reread your award. But in the meantime, hopefully you've got a good story for us today, and I'm just going to subside and hand over to you. Take it away, Rob.
I do. Do you mind if I share my screen? Is that?
Please do.
I do apologize if you hear a child in the background. My daughter is at home, so there may be some crying. But I wanted to keep this kind of really short. I didn't want to go into too much detail because some of you already know what the Scottish Social Services Council have been up to. But recently we got into a situation where we have much more submissions for open badges coming in than we can actually cope with. And in order to deal with that, we're going to roll out peer assessment, which means we can scale our platform to much more of an audience than we do at the moment. Effectively, SSSC Open Badges is just an assessed portfolio service. Some of our learners may think it's a learning management system because they'll come to the website, they'll find badges they want to apply for, there'll be set challenges. Those challenges will involve self-directed online learning, but none of those learning resources are actually stored on our website. They tend to be either on separate learning zones or they belong to our partners elsewhere. What we do keep on SSSC Open Badges is the reflective accounts that learners write up after they've completed the online learning experience and the endorsements that they get from people who they work with to say that they've actually put their learning into practice. We at the moment, as of today, have just over 16.5 thousand learners using SSSC Open Badges to record their CPD. They are typically, when somebody submits a reflective account, we will get, or we promise to get their submission assessed within 28 days. In reality, they get an answer much faster than that. It's usually within 3 to 4 days they'll find out whether or not a badge is awarded or if they need to do some more work before they can get the badge. On average, 1/3 of the submissions we receive on a daily basis will be returned to the learner as needs more work because they don't meet the minimum criteria for the open badge. That's generally because they haven't followed the instructions or the quality of the reflective account is so poor that we wouldn't accept that as evidence of continuous professional development. Once we award a badge, that reflective account, which can be anything between about 200 to 300 words, becomes the evidence for the open badge. So when people share that badge, when you click on the evidence link, you'll go straight back through to their reflective account. So we started looking at peer assessment last year because we started to see a trend in SSSC Open Badges where we're going to soon exceed 2,500 submissions per month. So that's 2,500 reflective accounts coming into us that need to be assessed. I can tell you that this month we are on course to hit 3,500 at the current trend. The lockdown has resulted in a lot of our early years workers being furloughed. And as a result of that, they're given a lot of time just now to apply for badges and to look at self-directed online learning. So we have seen a tenfold increase in what we would normally expect at this time of year. We've looked at automated assessment as one option for this. And when we started to discuss this with our learners, they were overwhelmingly negative about that. And I'm not surprised. They've got some experience of automated learning or automated assessment before. And the quality just it wasn't where we needed it to be. We use automated tools to help us in the way we do assessments, and I would say they're only about 70% accurate. They tend to get an awful lot of false positives. We suspect there'd be a lot of badges awarded that a human would not award. And also we know that some people were actually able to write for the automated assessment rather than write for their own continuous professional development. We realized that over the course of 2 or 3 years that the faster we can get a decision to a learner about whether or not a badge is going to be awarded, the more likely they are to come back to our platform and either resubmit evidence or apply for another badge. And we want to increase engagement with the 16.5 thousand users who are already making use of the site. So we want to be able to reduce that assessment time from 28 days or several days down to a few hours. And peer assessment's one way that we think we'll be able to do that. Also at the moment, because we are overwhelmed with the amount of assessments that we're providing, I think I've done about probably 1,200 in the past 6 days. I can't provide feedback. I'm using canned scripted feedback time and time again, and that's not why I came into learning and development. But it's the only thing we can do to get through the numbers. So we want to be able to provide learners with decent feedback about the quality of their submission, where they might be going wrong, what they're doing really well. And we think the best people to provide that feedback are actually peers themselves. Also, we expect people who are using peer assessment. We've seen this before in some of our structured courses. Where we use peer assessment, people actually get far better at producing their own reflective accounts, because by assessing others, they're learning where people can go wrong. They're adapting that, they're changing their own practice to make sure they don't make the same mistakes. So our current process at the moment is a learner will submit evidence for an open badge. The organisation that issues that badge will then assess that evidence, and the learner will be notified of the decision. Either a badge will be awarded, or they'll get some feedback on what needs work, and they can then resubmit and try and get the badge in the second attempt. We don't limit the number of attempts somebody can make. The new process, it will be the same from the learner's point of view, but instead of the evidence being assessed by an issuer, it will be assessed by 3 peers who already hold that badge. They'll then be notified of the decision, and unlike the current system, they'll get the scores and they'll get feedback. And issuers will then take on quality assessment. So we'll be able to simply quality assess what's going on, and we'll do a bit of sampling around that. When I sat down with the digital learning team I think about a year and a half ago now, I think Dawn will be able to tell you when we first started looking at peer assessment. I think it might have been a year and a half. We really wanted to figure out what are the principles we're going to do this by, because we've all experienced peer assessment ourselves. My own experiences, not all of them have been positive. In some cases, I've found peer assessment just becomes a market for you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. In some cases, I've received such negative feedback, I've just never gone back to that course again, and a couple of MOOCs can be like that. And the negative feedback might have been justified, but it did put me off going back. And also, in sometimes, what I thought was actually a good piece of work was rejected, only for it to be accepted on the second or third time I resubmitted the same thing. So we were worried how people would see the quality of peer assessment compared to the way we do it at the moment, where you have a learning and development advisor at the national regulator for the workforce actually making the same decision. So we set up our principles. One, that a learner will only assess submissions for badges that they already hold. That's different to what tends to happen on some of the MOOCs that we've worked with, where a cohort of people will go through a course, they will all submit the same assignment, and before they've been awarded that assignment, they will assess the assignments provided by other students. We want to make sure that you can only assess when you've actually been deemed capable of gaining the very same badge that you're assessing for. We're going to assess in threes, so we'll require a majority decision from 3 peers before we decide whether or not to award a badge. We're going to set mandatory badges for everybody using the platform. Now, we haven't had mandatory badges before. We're worried that it might stifle engagement, that it might prevent people from starting to use badges as a way of learning. But in order to progress, I think we've kind of overcome that now with 2,500 submissions coming in per month. In order to progress, we're going to have mandatory badges, just 3 of them. And again, we're going to have to make sure that we've got some oversight here. One of the things that we're going to do to make sure that this is almost self-healing in a way is when there are no current badges to assess, we're going to allow learners to assess historic submissions, so submissions where there's already been a decision. What we expect from this is it should identify if a badge was awarded or declined that shouldn't have been, maybe it should have been a different decision. So by random reassessment of historic submissions by peer assessors, we hope to be able to add a bit more to quality assurance than we could just with the issuers helping out with QA. There are going to be 3 mandatory badges now for everybody who starts using SSSC Open badges. 2 of them already exist. Our Getting Started series consists of around about 10 videos where people get to grips with what open badges are, why they're different to what they might have done before, how our platform works. They're aimed at a very basic level for people who've perhaps never used a computer or a smartphone before. Our Writing Evidence for open badge submissions really takes people through the basics of reflective writing. We're going to expand that slightly so it looks into more detail about reflective writing and self-directed learning, and we're going to join the 2 of those together. So almost it's going to become a study skills for CPD video series. And our new badge will be peer assessing, albeit it will be about how to assess. It will be, I imagine the videos will be around about 20 minutes long, but they're going to go into some depth about what you should be looking for when you come to assess a submission from a peer. We're going to have a credit-based marketplace for badges. So every time somebody applies for a badge that isn't a mandatory badge, they'll be charged a credit, and it could be they might have to spend 3 credits on a submission or 5 credits on a submission, or maybe just 1 credit. The way learners will earn credits is by assessing submissions. We will have some badges that might be free. There might be some issuers who don't want to use peer assessment. They'll be happy to assess badges as they come in, so they'll be taken out of the peer assessment loop. But we expect that around about 95% of the badges we have on our site will be peer assessment by the end of the year. To encourage people to provide really good feedback, we're going to award bonus credits to the person who the learner who received the feedback decides had provided the most helpful. And we're going to have the ability to take individual learners out of peer assessment entirely. If we find that there might be an accessibility requirement for them, we'll be able to basically top their account up with 1,000 credits so they can go away and apply for badges without having to get into peer assessment. I had hoped that I'd have a live working version of the website to show you, but things being as they are, our developers are all working from home on fairly horrendous equipment. So we're not quite there yet. We won't be until the 17th of April. But these are kind of mock-ups of how the peer assessment screens will look. On the first screen on the left-hand side, this is just something where a learner will go in and they'll be able to click that Allocate Submissions button. They'll be allocated 3 submissions, which they can go on and assess. And what the assessment screen looks like is on the right-hand side. I expect that it might take about 10 to 15 minutes for someone to assess a submission. Our assessment criteria for our badges really takes in 5 factors. Those are format, where we're kind of looking at, is it actually legible evidence? Has the person provided a photograph that shows nothing at all? It's not what we'd be looking for. Reflection, the quality of the reflective account. Is it descriptive, or is it actually showing some insight into the difference it might make to the learner's practice? Criteria, all of our open badges have a criteria where we tend to set questions or challenges for the learner to undertake, and we expect the assessor to try and determine that that criteria has been met. We also look at links to policy. So if the learner within the reflective account has gone on to talk about, here's my local procedure here, here's how I would use it. So it might be, for instance, you're talking about your health and safety procedure within your workplace. And engagement. Engagement's been a key one for us. We usually always ask learners to go off and share their learning with others, or to talk about the subject they've just covered with either their manager or peers. And that engagement is something that we've found quite useful in getting some sort of word of mouth out about our badges. In fact, our badge platform's grown to where it is because in some of our badges, we've asked people to go away and tell your colleagues about this and encourage them to apply for the same badge. Those will be scored by 3 different point factors. It will either be this needs work or it's not covered at all. It'll be satisfactory or it will be excellent. At the moment, when we assess, we simply assess on a scale of 0 to 10, but the learner doesn't necessarily see what elements out of that assessment criteria they haven't quite made it on. So by moving over to peer assessment, we'll be able to give them much more information about how they might target their resubmission. So because we're providing the learner now with a breakdown of their score, and because they've got the feedback as well, our hope is that this is going to give much more valuable information to learners about where they can improve. It will give them valuable information about what they're doing really well. That might not be enough in one badge, but we hope that over 30 or 40 badges, that kind of intelligence about your own learning and development should help people move further in terms of continuous professional development, because they'll be able to identify places where they might be strong, places where they might be weak. Once we are no longer assessing, because at the moment it's about 200 hours per month we're having to find within the SSSC in order to assess the submissions that are coming in, I would rather use the 200 hours that we've got to develop new badges and to quality assure and to look at the materials, the support materials we have on the website to make things better for learners. But we will have to do a bit of quality assurance to make sure things are working. There's some real concern out in the sector about us using peer assessment. People do feel that the quality won't be there. I expect that even with the best support, around about 1/5 of peer decisions will fail quality assessment in the first year. But I think once we've got over the first year, that will start to improve drastically. Obviously, we'll have the ability to reverse any decisions that is made by a peer assessor. One of the things we've looked at is what if we have somebody who just approves everything or just declines everything in order to get as many points as possible and work their way through the platform so they can apply for badges. So we will look at having something very similar to what YouTube does for accounts. We're going to have an account reputation score. And the account reputation score will work something like this. The account will either be in good standing, where we're fine, we're happy. It could well be that somebody, when they're peer assessing, is continuously not applying the assessment rubric correctly, in which case we'll give them a rubric strike. They'll be notified about that and they'll be directed to videos that will remind them about what the rubric is and how it works. We'll have guideline strikes. Now, the guidelines are different from the rubric because they tend to talk about the tone, perhaps how you provide feedback, how you provide constructive feedback. And after 3 strikes within a 3-month period, we will remove somebody's ability to be a peer assessor, which will effectively stop them from proceeding with the website until they've gained the peer assessment open badge again, and we'll probably give them a task to try and address where they might have fallen foul of either a guideline strike or a rubric strike. Sorry for the incredibly bureaucratic process, but we're trying to, with this, address a number of concerns that stakeholders and learners had about the introduction of peer assessment. When will this all happen? We're still developing it. On the 17th of April, I will be able to see the first working version of the peer assessment process. We will be testing it throughout May. We will update our peer assessor materials in June. We're going to update the rest of our learning materials in terms of the getting started videos and the writing evidence videos, because this will be quite a significant change to the website, where before you could just go to an open badge and submit your evidence for it and apply for it. Now you'll have to be a peer assessor to earn credits to get most of those badges. But we expect by September 2020, or perhaps sooner, perhaps even by August, to have peer assessment turned on for most of our open badges. And that was really all I had to the point. So I imagine there'll be quite a bit of questions. And I know, Don, maybe if you want me to speak a bit more about how XAPI is going to come into that, or about the app, I'd be more than happy to. But it was just to get your take on whether you thought this is something that might be workable, because we have no theory to suggest that this might work. We're just going to try it, and it's either going to work or it's going to fail. But at the moment, we're out of options. We have to find a way to scale up beyond 2,500 submissions, and this is the best we could come up with.
Okay, that's great. So if you can unshare, then we can maybe go to the questions. That'll be good, although we may need to sort of go back and look at a slide or two. So that's great. Wow, that's pretty exciting stuff. We do have some questions. Would you consider assessor badges? I think you ended up answering that. That question came in early on, but let me know if I've misunderstood Mr. Green, whoever that is, Serge.
Yeah, it is true. We're going to have assessor badges, and in order to become a peer assessor, someone will have to complete, it will be a fairly basic peer assessment badge that will explain from a technical point of view how peer assessment works on our platform, but also walk people through what we look for when we assess. And I think this is going to be valuable to learners because we've never really been upfront with learners about how we assess the submissions that come in. And I think that goes way back to the point that when the SSSC had post-registration training and learning, where people used to submit their record of learning every 3 years, every 5 years, we were never really clear with people about what we were looking for in terms of a reflective account. We were never really clear with people about what kind of learning and development we'd be looking for them to do. There were some basic instructions. But I feel that the only way to get good at something is actually to do it. So the peer assessment badge will be fairly basic. It will get people started, and then we'll just simply quality assure to make sure that people are working their way up. Now, we will be collecting evidence of the most experienced assessors on the website. So as you gain your credits for undertaking assessments, you will have a lifetime credit score that will almost become your experience ranking on the website. So we'll be able to see that this person's done quite a lot. I'd imagine that when it comes to decisions about the future of open badges, we will be going back to the people who have those high experience scores and asking them about what they would like to see on the site and involving them much more in decision making about the site, because if they say they're putting a lot of work into it, we'd like to see them get something out of it. But the peer assessment badge will be there, and it will just be one to begin with, but I can see us introducing 3 or 4 extra ones for people who want to take it a bit further.
Great. So later. Okay, so the other one is the self-healing. You were talking about that, and I initially thought you meant the badges that were issued before peer assessment, but I think what you're talking about is badges that were peer assessed and self-healing those. Is that correct?
No, it's going to be all of them. It's going to be everything that we've ever issued, the entire archive. And we've done that for a couple of reasons. One, we want to see how peers assess compared to how we've assessed. So if we suddenly get someone who might be making lots of outlier decisions, shall we say, somebody who's acting strangely in their assessment, we'll be better able to detect that on badges that have already been assessed and awarded, rather than where it's an average of live badges. But also, I want to identify the things that we might have awarded that perhaps we shouldn't have, and we can start to look at how we deal with that in-house in terms of quality assessment. Because I imagine there are badges out there that we haven't, and if we find that we have got assessors who are on majority opinion saying, Robert Stewart, why did you award that badge? Then I need to sit back and look at our rubric and look at how we describe that rubric to people.
Okay, just as long as you don't end up being locked out, that's all.
Well, it's odd because I now apply for our Learning Challenge badges on the website, and I'm looking forward to the fact that some of my Learning Challenge badges will be peer assessed by learners.
Okay, great. Actually, just talk briefly about the Learning Challenge badges.
Oh, yeah, so the Learning Challenge badges it's an idea we've had for a long time. As I say, we like to think of SSSC Open Badges as being an online portfolio. But it's a structured portfolio because we always set the learning activities you could do. So if you had something you've done, but we didn't have a badge for it, you couldn't apply for a badge. So the Learning Challenge badges left it up to the learner what topic they learned about, what learning resources they found to learn about that topic. And we just structured a quick reflective account template that would allow people to apply for that badge and then get endorsements off the back of that badge from their peers. So the Learning Challenge badges at the moment is 6 badges, and if you collect all 6, you get, within the same year, you get a single Learning Challenge badge for 2020. They're starting to prove to be quite popular, but one of the things that's addressed for us is I no longer get the question, I've undertaken this activity, I've looked at this policy document, I've rewritten it, can I get a badge for that? It's like, well, I can't create a badge, but now they can use the Learning Challenge badge.
That's awesome. So they get a badge for the Learning Challenge, and if they do 6 of them, what do they get then?
Well, they get incremental. They get incremental badges. So there's Learning Challenge Activity 1, 2, 3. Once they've got all 6, they get the Learning Challenge badge for 2020.
I see.
It does mean if someone starts and doesn't quite complete it, they've still got 4 badges or 5 badges.
Okay. And the when they're justifying the badge, so they're mapping it to some kind of policy or something like that?
Yeah, it's effectively a reflective account. So we'd expect to see what did you use for your learning, and if at all possible, if it's a free resource linked to it, because we like to know about that too. What do people take away from that? So we'd be looking about at least 150 words about what that's meant to someone's own knowledge and skills, what they're going to take forward, and then how that's going to change their practice. But then that question again, when it comes to engagement, how are you going to share that with your colleagues back in your workplace? So it really could be anything. Somebody could read, if the Scottish Government release a new policy document on early years, the chair of a nursery might pick that up and decide that they're going to read through that and find out what's important for me out of this, how do I communicate this to staff. But it could be something as simple as, and one of the examples I'd say was a really good one, it was somebody who simply looked up home baking because they've never done any home baking. They've suddenly got the time to do it, and that's what they submitted. But because this person, when they're not furloughed, they work in care at home, so they actually go into people's homes to help them. Now, if someone says, I'd like you to help me bake a cake, they know how to bake a cake. So they've applied for their badge off the back of that. They've included the YouTube videos that they've used to learn how to do that. And they've actually written a really good reflective account. So I would never have thought you could write a reflective account about how to bake a cake. But they've looked at why this is important, that they know how to do this. And they've looked with some insight about, well, I didn't know how to do this before. So when somebody asked me, can I help them with their baking? I didn't know how. And obviously that had an impact at that moment in practice. And they've looked at, well, this is something I need to address.
Wow, that's kind of cool. So just there's a quick question again, just to follow up on this. So you're talking about people coming up with really interesting reflections, and you're saying that this is really a portfolio site now. You kind of started with badges, but it's really a portfolio site. In what ways are those reflections made more public? Are you encouraging people to do that either in blog and then make a link in the badge to the blog, or taking the contents of the badge and making that more public? How are you dealing with that?
There's some of that we're actually doing under our GDPR. So we launched a number of features under GDPR to allow users to more easily share. Obviously, it's open badges, so people can take our badges off, take them to another badge backpack, and when you click on that criteria link, you'll come back to our site. When you click on the evidence link, you come through to a page that we generate, an award page that has the learner's details and has all of their evidence on that page. But actually, the majority of people, certainly over the last 3 weeks, all of the early years nurses who've actually been sharing our badges, they haven't actually gone to the backpacks. They've taken the PDF certificates that we have. They've printed them off, they've photographed them, and they've been posting the photographs to Twitter. So we do have the QR codes there, so but some have even hidden the QR codes. But at the moment, what I'm looking at is how we can encourage more people to share their reflection. And I think we've had this conversation before, Don, that maybe if I've got 2 or 3 badges, I'm not going to see much value in the reflective accounts. I mean, when people apply for a badge, the reflective account, I think from their point of view is, I'm writing this in order to get the badge. Once I've got the badge, I've got the thing I want, which is just the badge. Once you've got about 30 badges, people tend to look back and think, I've got about 30 different reflective accounts there that tell people what I'm good at, with maybe 10 or 20 endorsements from my colleagues saying, yeah, you are good at that. Then suddenly the portfolio element of that becomes more important. So we're trying to think about how we can make that information more mobile. So because we built our entire platform off WordPress, we've asked the developer to look at, is there a way we can do an XML export of all the person's reflective accounts, all of their endorsements, allow them to take that export, go to a website like wordpress.com or Blogger, and import that XML file and immediately create a blog based on all their reflective accounts with all their endorsements becoming the comments in the blog. So I know that WordPress allows people to import XML and essentially create a blog from one they already have. So if we can do that, my hope is that people will then, once they've got their 30 badges, think, I want to create a blog off the back of that and go off and do that. And that might add more visibility. But at the moment, I think in part because we're now looking at active user numbers on the site that we've never seen before, you know, well over 1,000 per day sometimes. We've now got into a point where people are actually sharing much more on Twitter, and it's how we encourage them to talk much more about not just the fact they've got the badge, but tell people about the evidence behind that badge.
Great. Okay, I had a question. Oh yeah, inter-rater reliability. So you have these, you know, this sort of learning that they do, and probably you have examples of, okay, this is sufficient, this is not sufficient, you know, that kind of thing. But do you have anything sort of where you can sort of tune your assessors, deliberately get assessors to get in tune with each other? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's this is something that when we just sit down, even within the digital learning team, we're a small team, just 5 people. 3 of us tend to assess badges on a regular basis, and we typically get together at a meeting. We have some pretty robust arguments. Some of our arguments, none of them have resulted in shouting yet. We have had big discussions about whether a particular evidence submission should result in a badge being awarded. And that's allowed us to come to terms with what we would accept, what we wouldn't accept. In terms of how that will work in peer assessment, I don't know. We're just going to have to look at that. That's part of the reason why we have the quality assurance process. I suspect that we're going to see some peer assessors who are just simply assessing in order to get the credits to apply for a badge. They don't necessarily care about what they're doing, so long as they get the credit to apply for the badge they want. Those are people we want to get out of the system as soon as possible, send them back to, not back to square one, but back to the peer assessor badge so they can learn a bit more about why it's important. But it's a question I'll just have to answer in a year's time. We have found when we've gone out to, and we have done some peer assessment exercises, tabletop exercises, where I've gone out to services, gone out to people who would be our audience for these badges, and we've shown them written submissions, and we've actually found that they're very good at coming to the same decisions we come to, and they tend to argue over the same things we argue over. And it's when they get to that point, it becomes difficult. So one of the things we will do is somebody decides that I don't know whether this badge should be awarded or not, they can just simply flag that badge. They won't need to do it, and it'll be flagged for quality assessment.
Okay,
It's going to take us a long time to figure it out.
Right, right. Okay, so that's interesting. So the peer assessment right now, it's essentially anonymous. They don't know who the other assessors are. They make their own decision, and those get totted up.
That's correct, and part of that is from my own experience of going through peer assessment on a recent MOOC, where I found a forum where effectively people were posting in the forum, by the way, here's a link to my submission. Do you mind assessing it for me? And people down the bottom were saying, oh yeah, do you mind assessing mine too? So we decided we wanted to have it anonymous. And we will still know from an administrator's point of view who's assessing what, so we can use that to decide whether we need to give feedback to a particular assessor. But it will be obvious to some people. If we've got a particularly popular badge and a cohort of people from the same employer are all going through it at the same time, they'll likely know each other from what they've written. It's one of the things where we've kept it anonymous because I've felt from GDPR, it's important to do that from a privacy perspective, because we don't want somebody being hunted down on Twitter because they gave negative feedback or they didn't award a badge.
Right.
I've had that happen to me on many an occasion, in fact, several times in the last week. But we just want to make sure that it's, at the moment, that we do trust people to kind of make the decisions even if they knew the person, but as far as possible, it will be an anonymous process.
Okay. Okay, great. So somebody had a question about the platform, and you've already partly answered it, WordPress. Can you just talk a little bit more about how it's being set up? Maybe even include some of the modules that might be associated with it?
Yeah, so it's a custom-built WordPress plugin. In fact, I think it's several custom-built WordPress plugins we use. They're developed by a company here in Dundee called MTC Media, who are a local development company. So it's a big plugin now. When we started, simply all we asked for is, can you give us a plugin that will allow us to make an open badge? And then we had a different plugin that allowed people to submit evidence, and we would assess that evidence. And it's grown really over the last 5 years into something that's quite big. We did have discussions earlier about, do we move this away from WordPress into something like a big PHP framework, or do we move the whole lot into something like Laravel? We're not quite there yet. I mean, like I said, WordPress is working out really well for us at the moment with 1,000 active users on the site at the same time. It's holding up with 16.5 thousand users overall, and I think we've got something short of about 15,000 reflective accounts on the platform now. The database is holding up quite well. So I'd go say, if you wanted to build an open badges platform, WordPress is a good choice. I know a lot of people go down the route of using Moodle. We didn't go down the route of using Moodle because our learners just don't like it. It was incredibly difficult to onboard people. I think it's fine if you have people who you know are going to be with you for a long time. So if you've got a cohort on a course, and that course might be 5 or 6 weeks long, you can go through the onboarding and they've got a reason to get to use Moodle. We've got people who've never used a computer before, and we're expecting them to sit in front of a computer and create an account, apply for badges. And that's something that we went down the WordPress route because we could simplify it as much as possible. I mean, I love Moodle. I use it. We do have Moodle for our learning zone. But out in the sector, if we used Moodle, we would fail to engage with about 90% of our audience.
Okay, so I think I've been taking up a lot of the oxygen. I'm going to hand over to some other people to ask questions. Serge, you have some questions? Oh, can't hear you.
Yes, a question about the assessors, and so they can't communicate together. But it might be possible, for example, then when the badge is sent to the claimant, that this, before it is sent, they can see the comments from the review from the other assessors. And maybe this would be an opportunity for them to revise their own assessment. And I'm thinking also, listening to a question that is on line 160, if you could develop the 3 assessors process. I think what you have explained is I love it because I was involved in NVQs. Mm-hmm. So I remember how we assessed portfolios on that. So I think it brings a real change to the fact that it is by the community and not just by an assessor, an appointed assessor. So I think it's huge progress here. But so there are 3 assessors. They can be selected randomly. But if there are 2 who says yes, they will say yes, and 1 who says no, do you go to find another one, or is it just a result?
It would be a majority decision. So if 2 said yes and 1 said no, the badge would be awarded by the majority. That was something that we looked at for quite a bit. And when we were doing the tabletop exercises, it tended to work out that if 1 person said no, that we would identify as being borderline. And typically speaking, we would make the same judgment. If it was somebody who's been assessing for the last 3 or 4 years, they would typically come into the same decisions as the majority would come to. I like what you're saying about, can we show the other assessors the comments coming in from the other 2 peers who might be assessing. I think there might be some scope for that. We could be able to attach the feedback.
Especially
yeah, sorry?
that there is a majority, because you could say that 2 say no, 1 says yes, and then they all see the why the person says yes, and they say, oh, yeah, maybe it was a bit unfair, yeah. And the other way around. But But the no is not just a no. A no is resubmit.
Yep.
Okay,
And
so it's not a no.
no, it's just resubmit. So we sometimes have a situation where we might award a badge on the 10th resubmission. But if we can get decisions to people as quickly as possible, that 10th resubmission might come in within 48 hours of the original submission. And we do see that. We know that some people skip some of our getting started materials. They skip the instructions as they're going through the criteria for the badge. And they're learning about that each time their submission comes back to them. But when we do have somebody who might have it back 5 or 6 times, generally on the next submission for their next badge, they get it first time because they've made all the mistakes they need to do. And I think allowing learners to make mistakes and learn from those, it can be far more effective than trying to cover everything at once. I'm going to take on board what you said. I'm going to, at some point, see if there's a way what we've got at the moment's built, but I'm going to see at some point, can we actually allow other assessors to see the decisions that are coming in? It may not be possible because we don't know how quickly these things will happen. On some of our badges, we can get maybe 20 submissions coming in an hour for that badge. So the assessments might be happening so quickly that we don't know what that's going to look like from a practical point of view. But it's going to be there. And I think one thing that will happen is if you make an assessment and your assessment was not the majority decision, people will be notified of that. And I think if we can then send the feedback back to them, it might help. What I'm keen to avoid, and this has happened in some tabletop exercises, is groupthink, where people tend to approve simply because they pick out one thing from the evidence that they agree with, but the rest of the evidence might be actually quite poor quality. And when the purpose of us assessing the badge evidence is so when that person shares their badge, when they're going for a job interview, the evidence they've got, we want that evidence for the badge to be the best that it can be. I mean, I don't want to award the bare minimum, although we do. I'd rather that we're giving the learner as much of a nudge as possible to say, can you do that a bit better?
Thank you.
I'll give you a credit in the source code for what we've put in here. It was down to a comment on the ORA call. Sorry, Don, I couldn't hear you.
Any other questions for Rob? Comments?
Maybe the one question I wrote, are all the badges created by the institution? I mean, can a social service worker make a badge proposal to the community? Perhaps something he finds useful that is not in the official badge list?
Yes, they can. The first way they would actually do that is by applying for one of the Learning Challenge badges. So because the Learning Challenge badge is open, we monitor those badges. And if we start to see 3 or 4 people or 5 or 6 people apply for that badge using the same learning resource, then we'll consider whether that needs to be a badge. I want to open the platform up so people could actually create their own badges. I suspect that will be used. What we're keen to encourage people to do is identify free learning resources that are out there that can make a difference quickly and get those into the hands of other learners quickly. So an example would be 3.5 weeks ago, it would have been brilliant to have a really good open source learning resource on COVID-19. And we were struggling to find one. But what if a learner could find that and think, that's good, I'm going to put that out there. In the absence of that kind of system at the moment, we have opened up a set of forums on the badges platform. We previously used those just for badge issuers and assessors to talk to one another about bugs that might be on the platform and give people advice on customer support. Now what we're doing is we've got that into the hands of learners. So I hope that learners will actually use the suggestions forum to say, I'd love to have a badge on this topic.
Thank you very much.
Just sort of a winding up question. If we wanted to propose something like this for our own systems, probably people in management would say, well, what difference does it make? You know, what are you using to sort of demonstrate impact of this? Maybe that's a long answer.
I think one of the biggest things in this is the fact that because we don't currently have peer assessment, I've had to identify 200 hours worth of staff time over the last month. And that's time that we're not spending developing new badges. That's time we're not spending developing new learning resources. That's time we're not spending trying to identify what's working well on the platform, what's not working well on the platform. Because so much of what we do now, I mean, for me, it's I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I log in, and I assess. That's pretty much it. It's a pretty boring life. And I'm not even given proper feedback. And I'm finding it really difficult to do that because I've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes to come to a decision on a badge. There's only so much I can type in that time. I'm using canned feedback, which is atrocious. And if we can move away from that, I'll be happy. But I think there'll be real benefits to this that we haven't identified yet that might be unexpected that could come out of this. And that might be around the improvements in the quality of evidence on the platform, just from the fact that learners will be much more aware of how submissions are assessed. And like I said, 1/3 of badge submissions we currently get are returned as needs work. Sometimes that's simply because the person hasn't understood what we're looking for in terms of evidence. They might have typed in, I'd really like to apply for this badge, full stop, and they've submitted the evidence. They've not gone through the criteria, they've not gone through the learning resources. So even just something as simple as making the getting started badges and the writing evidence badges mandatory will overcome that problem and reduce a lot of the badges we return.
Yes,
Go ahead.
yes, I had one question, but I formulated it a bit like a Philip question, which is, you have the learning challenge badges. So if someone gets a learning challenge, the content is free, means the person create. Could someone else claim the same badge? And I think you answered to that question.
Could someone, yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other question I would have linked to that is, you have badges linked to learning. Could you have also badges linked to practices? That is, someone is documenting a new practice and ask to be recognized for this new practice. And then this practice could become a badge for the community. So it's not just about learning, it's also about practices and things that are emerging through practices.
Yeah. That's something that we wanted to explore this year, but because of the amount of time we're spending assessing, we haven't been able to explore that. We made a big change to our platform this year. We actually started, you know how open badges have a standards mechanism, so you can actually tie them into standards. Within Scotland, we have a thing called the Common Core of Knowledge and Skills that all social service workers have. We started to map our badges to that Common Core. I think that's the start of it, but we're also going to look at our practices, and what we're trying to ask people about are what are the values, practices, and things that people have done in their careers that have made a real difference to them. That was something I wanted to do this year. It involves a lot of going out and speaking to people to get an idea of what they might be. And it's something I hope will come next year.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So we'll have to get you back.
I really should make a habit of being here every month because I think I've learned so much from the recordings. I need to stop hiding away and just watching the recordings afterwards.
Okay. Well, that's every 2 weeks. So that's hopefully you'll have some time freed up from assessing that you can spend a little more time with us. That would be great.
Pleasure.
Well, that's excellent. Lots of ideas for me anyway. I think you can tell from all my questions. Anybody, any final words?
Yeah, brilliant. I think you're doing exactly the kind of system I would dream to have. And I would have loved to have it at the time of NVQs, but I think it's coming now, and it is a way to have.
There's a large number of SVQ students in Scotland, and Scottish Vocational Qualification students who are using badges as a precursor to undertaking formal learning to get used to reflective writing. But we're also starting to see something I've always wanted to see, which is SVQ providers using our badge evidence as recognition of prior and formal learning.
Yeah.
And that's been a real big game changer for us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think this is going to be one of the stellar recordings. A lot of people check back with it. And all the best with that. And please, please chime in again with us. We may want to extend an invitation for you to be an open recognition ambassador if you're up for that.
I'd love to do that.
Yes, and why not see you in Lille in October for our EPIC conference? Would be
I'm
very
trying
nice.
to lure him.
Possible.
I'd really like to. I was
By
going to
boat,
be-
by boat, it's just straight to the south.
Yeah, I was going to try to be at Epic last year, but I ended up double booked and being at World of Learning in Birmingham. So this year, I mean, touch wood, people from the UK will still be allowed to travel outside of the UK come then.
Yeah, hopefully. It's only 90 minutes, but that doesn't include passport control now, so.
I think I get a good 4 hours for passport control now.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rob. It's been great to see you again.
Thank you.
It's been great to
Good
see
to see
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rob. Bye-bye.